Chapter 6 is on planning, implementing, and evaluating. Planning is essential for resource management and is increasingly so as people have less and less time and feel more constrained, as well as the fact that the world's population continues to increase, which is straining the resources that we have and need in order to survive. There are many different things we plan for. Some examples are planning for a career, planning for a vacation next year, wedding planning, and planning for taxes. Before discussing planning, we have to define what planning is. A plan is a detailed schema, program, strategy, or method that is developed before taking action. A plan should have a purpose with some end result in mind, and a plan should be useful and satisfy some need. Although plans are also used to satisfy wants, it's not only needs that are part of plans. An example of a plan is a financial plan, which would be a detailed strategy to use my resources in order to reach some goal that's related to my finances, some financial goal. A process is a system of operations working together in order to produce some end result. The planning process is a series of decisions that lead to need or goal fulfillment. Planning starts by mentally organizing activities and is a thinking and information gathering process. The planning process differs from person to person, situation to situation, and also varies based on what stage of the life cycle you're in, whether you're a single person early in life or a married person with children. Those plans will be very different. The planning process requires consideration of the time, energy, human resources available, as well as the cost and the schedules of those involved. The planning process is more complex than the decision-making process. The planning process helps us to visualize what may or may not happen, and with the planning process, the steps progress in an orderly, logical sequence. You have certain steps within the plan, and you must move from one to the next generally. They're in an orderly, logical sequence, whereas the decision steps can often go together or in a somewhat different order than the DECIDE acronym. Sitting down and making a plan takes a considerable amount of time. A lot of people have become so caught up in their everyday activities that they don't have the time or the energy or the desire to sit down and plan something before taking action. According to Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Effective People, he gave an example that there was somebody cutting down a tree. They didn't have time. They felt that they didn't have time to stop and sharpen the saw because they were too busy cutting down the tree. It's one example of how you get caught up in an activity, and so you don't have time to stop and look at the situation. Planning is affected by time constraints and also stress. For example, I like to plan out my meals for the week and go grocery shopping on Sundays, but some Sundays there might be other activities that I would need to be involved with, and I might not have enough time to do that, or I might be thinking about something I need to do this week related to work or other tasks and might feel too stressed out to go do that on Sunday. Our plans are affected by situational factors. This is because the situational factors shape the wants that we have, our needs, and also our goals. Physical surroundings are location, sound, and cleanliness. One example is location. Somebody who lives in a rural setting would probably have different plans as a result of having different wants, needs, and goals than somebody who was from an urban area. Situational factors also include time of day, month, year, or season. One example of this is accountants who are extremely busy during tax season. This might take away from the time they have to plan other activities during tax season. Social surroundings include our friends, strangers, and crowds. These will affect our plans and also the task involved, the reason why you're involved with some activity and what needs done. Task saturation, according to a professor at Florida State University, occurs when people like our coworkers or family members or team members are so busy doing things that they can't plan or lead effectively. Some signs of task saturation are canceling meetings, showing up late, or complaining all of the time about all of the paperwork or other tasks involved with some activity. For example, being involved in several groups that all meet at the same time, that's task saturation. Our personality also affects our ability to plan, and this is because it influences how we assess different situations. Introverts are those who direct their thoughts inward, whereas extroverts are those who are more interested in what the people around them think. Introverts might process information about a situation on their own, whereas the extroverts might ask the opinions of others and seek the help of experts before making a decision or before developing a plan. Our personality affects how we gather information and also how we process that information. Motivation is a big part of the planning process and also affects whether that plan is followed through and the end result is achieved or not. A person, in order to reach the goal or desired end result, must have an attractive or desired objective in mind, and also must have persistence and not give up, so to follow through the process from beginning to end. Maslow's planning theory states that our needs motivate our behavior. This also states that our unsatisfied needs lead us to be frustrated and stressed out. So planning based on satisfying the needs that we have can reduce frustration, increase hope, and reduce the stress that we have. According to Maslow, on average, people satisfy about 85% of physiological needs, about 50% of belongingness needs and love, about 40% of esteem needs, and 7% of security and safety needs. The main idea between looking at motivation and planning is that planners have to be motivated to reach that end result and want to succeed in reaching their end goal. Standards are also an important part of the planning process. Standards were defined in Chapter 1 as quantitative or qualitative criteria that reconcile resources with demands and also serve as measures of our values and goals. Standards within the planning process provide criteria for action. They reconcile the resources with demands and serve as measures of values and goals. Our standards will evolve and develop over time. The standards that we have today probably won't be the same that we have when we're 70 years old. Families and individuals adjust the standards that they have to meet their needs at each stage of life and also based on what resources they have at a specific time. Nearly every plan includes some kind of schedule or sequence of events and activities. Scheduling refers to the specification of time-bounded projected activities that allow us to reach our goals. Some examples of schedules are written plans that have deadlines or timetables. One example of this in college is it's helpful for you to plan out what courses you'll take each semester at the beginning of your time in college in order to reach your goal of graduation in the shortest amount of time possible and with using the least amount of resources that are necessary. This involves not only scheduling what you'll take each semester, but then also looking at what is offered within the timetables for each semester. Scheduling involves the mental process of sequencing, which is the ordering of activities, events, and resources. Again, sequencing is the ordering of activities, events, and resources in order to achieve goals. It is part of scheduling and includes to-do lists as well as timetables in order to complete individual tasks and be able to check those off based on the to-do list and the timetables. There are several different ways that activities can be completed. For example, independent activities occur when one activity is done at a time. You might watch TV, only watch TV, not do anything else. That would be an independent activity. Dovetailing or multitasking is when you complete two or more activities at the same time. You might be watching television and doing your homework at the same time. You might be talking on the phone and searching on the internet to see what movie you're going to see tomorrow. That's an example of multitasking. Overlapping activities is when you're moving back and forth from one to the other activity. You might be cooking a meal and doing laundry at the same time. You start the meal, put it in the oven, go throw a load of clothes into the washing machine, go back to your meal again, go back to the laundry. You're overlapping them. And interdependent activities is where you complete one activity before the next activity begins. You must, in order to graduate, complete all of your coursework and meet all of the requirements before you can apply for graduation. That's where you're completing all of the requirements before you move on to the next step. There are several attributes of good plans that are discussed in the textbook. For a plan to be effective, it first needs to be clear and concise. This means that it's easily understood. You know what the plan is, where you're going, and what the end goal is. They should also be flexible. You want to be able to change if the conditions unexpectedly change. For example, if you can't get into a course that you really want this semester, you would adjust. You would be flexible. Look what else is available rather than just quitting school altogether. Adaptive is very similar to this, being able to adjust. For example, if you don't get into the major or don't get accepted into the major you want, you would find another match that would help you reach your career goals. Plans should also be realistic. They should be feasible and likely to work. If you hate to write, you don't enjoy writing, you don't enjoy reading literature, you don't want to plan to get an English degree. Plans should also be goal-directed. Specific challenging goals can lead us to have to reach higher level goals than vague, do your best types of goals. For example, you might specify, I want to learn 3 languages within my lifetime. The textbook discusses 3 different types of plans. First is the directional plan. This is where there's a linear path to a long-term goal. An example of a directional plan is career planning. You're moving along this linear path to your desired goal of some specific career. Contingency plans are also known as backup plans. For example, when you're applying for jobs, you might really, really want one specific job, but you would have a contingency plan where if you didn't get that job, another job that you would be interested in or another company you would be interested in applying, or a different plan if the main thing doesn't go through. A strategic plan is what focuses attention on the initial stages of the decision-making process. This is where there's a proactive search for new opportunities or a reactive solution to an existing problem. When you're searching for a job, there are several different strategies you would be involved with, such as creating a really good resume for employers to look at, finding jobs that are available for you, and then matching the skills that you have to the job requirements or the job specification of that company. So although you might not look at it exactly the same way as them, maybe you have skills that you could match to their job description. The planning process and whether we achieve our goals is affected by whether we are proactive or reactive. Being proactive means taking responsibility for your own life. It's related to having the freedom and power to make your own choices rather than blaming the environment around you. An example of being proactive is if an individual or student fails a course, they look at the situation and think or say, because I didn't attend class regularly or put in my best effort, I failed the course, rather than placing responsibility on the course itself or the instructor or the people around you. Rather than blaming it on them, it's taking responsibility for yourself. The opposite is being reactive, and that's where you're overly affected by outside forces. People who are reactive can get put in a bad mood, for example, by bad weather or somebody else doing something that's not that related to them. And going back to that same example of being proactive, an individual or a student who fails a course might look at the situation and say, I failed the course not because of myself, but because the professor was horrible, the assignments didn't make sense, and me not attending class at all had nothing to do with failing the class. It was everybody else's fault. A big part of the planning process is actually implementing the plans, which means putting the plans or procedures into action. It's easier to make plans than to implement them. If you think of how many different plans you've made with your friends or your family, and then look at how many have actually been implemented, how many you've followed through with, you'll see that a lot of times you make the plans but don't actually follow through. The factors that affect whether we implement a plan are those that affect planning itself. So it would be situational factors, our personality, and also motivational factors. This also includes controlling the action. After you put your plan into action, you need to check them to see that you're actually getting to that desired end state or reaching your goal. An example of controlling action is meeting with your advisor each semester or each year to discuss how you're progressing toward graduation to make sure you're on track and that you're going to get to that desired end state of graduating. Evaluating involves judging or examining the cost or the value or worth of a plan based on your standards or rules. For example, if your family holds educational attainment as a standard, you reaching your goal of graduating with a degree in a specific field would have high worth. It would be judged to have a high value or high worth. Evaluating involves looking at whether you reached your goal or the end result of the plan. In order to ensure better end results, people often assess the results of the plan or gather information in order to compare the results with those of the past. An example of this is if you complete a degree, you might look at your starting salary and compare that to somebody else's starting salary in order to assess the results of your goal of getting that degree. The storyboard is one example of a planning tool or a planning technique that can be used. There's an example storyboard on page 173 of the textbook. The storyboard involves using words or pictures to illustrate the main steps that you'll need to take in order to reach some goal or end result. Storyboarding is often used by advertisers or movie and TV screenwriters to show the main scenes in a commercial, a show, or a movie, but it can also be used as a planning technique to show each step that you would need to go through in order to get to that desired outcome.